super excited to have Dr. Mark Allen with me, who is one of the world's leading experts in brain rehabilitation and has a PhD in this and runs cognitive effects in Utah, amongst other things. Can you give us a little bit of background about yourself, Dr. Allen, and how did you get here? Give us the 2-minute version.
Yeah, there are a lot of twists and turns to it, but it all started back, like you say, with my PhD at Johns Hopkins, and we were one of the first places to get our MRI machine outfitted to be able to do functional MRI. So this was back in it was around 98 or so. So it was really in the infancy of fMRI, and I just had to do it. It seemed like science fiction at the time to see, to be able to see the brain doing things in real time, and so I got right into it, and that's sort of driven, the not the direction, but it's been the basis of every opportunity that I've had. And so I was in academics for a while as a professor, and one of my graduate students, my first PhD student, ended up being my partner in business in doing this concussion rehab. And so we did, for her PhD, we did the early version of the assessment that we do to be able to do the treatment that we do. And then through a lot of opportunities, we were able to befriend very high level athletes that are very famous, like Tom Brady, and so he's an American football player who's probably, the most famous or infamous.
Everybody knows him.
And so that opened up a lot of doors, legitimate or not. People would say, "Oh, you work with him, you must be good," which isn't necessarily true, but we'll take it. So that led to more and more opportunities, and I left academics in order to pursue, actually helping people. That was what my partner, Dr. Fong, Alina Fong, who's fantastic and should be on this podcast as well. She kept pushing me, get out of your comfortable ivy tower, whatever, and let's do things that can actually help people. And it's a lot more fun. I enjoy it. It's so gratifying to, actually do things that no one else can do for people, when they're stuck, when they've been everywhere and nothing else works, and then you have a solution for them and it works. It's, incredibly satisfying. So I've kind of skipped around a lot in, my history back and forth, but it really is centered around that power of functional MRI to, instead of guessing what's going on in somebody's brain, to actually see what it is and then be able to effectively treat it.
Can you explain to lay people who don't know the difference between New Zealand? We don't have a lot of functional MRIs. We've got a lot of standard MRIs. Can you explain the difference between the two and why you don't see a heck of a lot in a normal MRI?
So it starts with, an MRI works by magnetizing tissue and then sending radio waves through, and that's how you're able to, because the radio waves interact differently with the way that the tissue has been magnetized. It allows you to distinguish different tissues within the body. Well, it turns out that the oxygen in the blood, the iron properties to it that change when it gets oxygenated, that disrupts the magnetic signal in a specific way. Mm-hmm. Now, the second kind of fortunate thing about physiology is that brain cells are really anxious about oxygen. So they're very proactive in getting themselves oxygen. They're actually competitive, and they do it very quickly and precisely. What that means is that when you see changes in oxygen in the brain, that is very, very likely to be tied to neural activity. And when you do the statistics correctly, you can distinguish, other rises and falls in oxygen from those that are coming from activated neurons. And so you give somebody a task to do, and it will, light up, so to speak, different areas of the brain. And, that's been mapped out for the last few decades, what kinds of tasks engage different brain areas that's allowed us to learn so much about how the brain works. But then when it comes to using this for on the medical side in treatment, then you have to have norms. So,
Mm.
brain cells
Healthy
they'll
brain.
become active to some degree, they might become deactivated, and it's all relative. So you have to have a context. So that's why we've collected hundreds and hundreds of data points from hundreds and hundreds of people that don't have any history of brain injury.
Mhm.
And then you can compare any individual who gets scanned to those
The
norms, and
database.
you
Yep.
can see how far away they are from normal, and then address that. So that's the basics of
That's
how we use functional MRI.
So that's sort of the magic of it. So when we go to the hospital, say we land up in the ED and we've had a hit to the head, they do an MRI. We don't see anything. They tell you to fine, go home and rest for a couple of days in a dark closet somewhere. What's wrong with that
Right.
picture, and why is that type
A
of
lot.
MRI not going to tell us? It doesn't show us,
So,
does it?
okay, so you really asked just the right questions, because the normal MRI or a structural MRI won't show any problems. A
Mm,
CT probably won't either, unless you've had something really severe. But if you've just had a concussion, and even a really bad concussion, even something bordering on what we'd call moderate to severe brain injury, you don't the brain cells don't die. And this is where the whole post-concussion
yeah,
symptom problem comes from. So brain cells don't die, but they get damaged, they get roughed up a bit. So a normal scan will show that they're still alive, so that no tissue has gone away, so it looks normal, so you're sent home. Resting, by the way, is absolutely the worst thing you can do.
yeah.
You've got to keep your heart rate up, keep those brain cells active, because what happens in about a third of people, or around there, is that the brain doesn't heal properly after a concussion, and also
Yeah,
after different viral infections as well, like COVID and West Nile
yeah.
virus, Lyme disease, so on. A similar thing happens. So the brain cells get damaged, they repair themselves, and they can repair themselves quite well, but they take a long time to do that. They take days, maybe weeks to do that. In the meantime, the brain gets impatient, so it reorganizes its network. So you have these brain cells that were responsible for doing some function. They get ignored, and some less adequate brain cells get picked up and integrated into the network. The brain wants to keep going.
Wow.
So it locks down on this solution of network organization, and once it gets there, it wants to stay there. So because it's keeping you're alive, you're eating, you're breathing, so it's not really motivated
Good.
to change.
Wow.
Now, this is where the kind of some things that are mysterious about concussion happen, because I enjoy speaking to wider audiences, because most of the time when I speak to people who aren't necessarily looking for information about concussions, they realize that they have post-concussion
Yeah.
syndromes. We
Most of
get
us
some
have got,
percentage of people after
yep.
a talk that will come up and say, I think that's what I have. And they don't think they have post-concussion syndrome, because a lot of times, because it's been a while since they had the concussion. So that's where and again, this is getting back to your question, why the
Yeah.
normal scan doesn't pick it up, because you've got this reorganization, the brain has improperly healed, and that can be kind of a ticking time bomb over it. So this could have happened years ago,
Yep.
and you'll keep plugging away, you can compensate for it, but you'll get to a point where either there's some new life stressors, or you're getting older, or just that the fuse on that ticking time bomb is just your brain, it runs out of the ability to compensate, and so you start getting these symptoms like headache, fatigue, um, irritability, your autonomic nervous system, and it's almost always the direction of the sympathetic, so being
Yeah. Over
overdriven, so
stressed. Yep.
feel kind of irritable and edgy and amped up when so you can be both fatigued and kind of
Tired and
amped
wired.
at the same time. It's kind of that gross feeling. And so so that's why your concussion can be a culprit, even though it was years ago,
Yep.
for how you feel.
Yep.
So that's a lot of information
Yeah, and I've got
packaged
100
into
questions
that
because that
question.
sort of blows my mind, right? Like that the fact that like we have this initial injury, we have the tearing of the axons or the whatever's in the brain, right? The initial thing. And so that's what they're looking
Mhm.
for in an MRI, that you haven't got a big dead part of the brain or some major bleed going on, and they might be able to pick that up. But they're not picking up unless it's a functional MRI, and unless you've got someone who knows how to read all that stuff, they're not picking up that the cell might be alive, but it's sort of I sort of picture them like not functioning properly. They're not firing properly. And so the reorganization of that network, that was a key moment for me when I was listening to one of your lectures, and I'm like, okay, that's the problem then, that we're having to overcome. The brain's adapted. And when we know, like as humans, when we create a habit or a ritual or a routine, it's very hard to break that routine, right? Because we've done it
Yeah.
over and over and over again, and we've practiced it. And that's sort of what's happening with this network, isn't it? It's reorganized itself. It's brought in the reserve players off the bench who aren't as good as the
Yes.
top players. They're not the Tom Brady's of the world, right? They're the
Yeah.
second-rate players to do the job that the top-rate players were doing. And then when you don't get those top-rate players back in the game unless you really have a concerted effort, a
Yes.
multifaceted, integrated approach. And this is where the magic lies in what you guys do. Is that correct?
That's correct, because it's about engaging neuroplasticity. And the brain doesn't like to do that. So it does it at the time of injury. It's a maladaptive plasticity. So that's what, anytime you reorganize networks, you have to induce neuroplasticity. The brain doesn't like to do that. So you have to convince it to do that. And that's where the trick. So now what do we do about it? That's the tricky part, is getting that engaging neuroplasticity, which takes a lot of effort and a lot of tricks to how you time what you're doing physically and cognitively, how you layer those therapies. And one thing that you mentioned is its intensity, but it's the sustained, what we call the sustained principle, where you have to go at it all day for many days in a row. So like maybe a week or 2 weeks. If you might have some talented therapists who are good at brain rehabilitation. So, whether it's insurance or however it works
Yeah.
in your country, pays for maybe so many sessions, so many times a month. So you go do one session a day and
Waste of
do a
time.
little change.
Yeah.
It perturbs the brain a little bit, but then when you're done with that therapy, it just wants to go back, to the way it's been doing things, and you can, kind of get a little bit of progress. When you go at it all day for several days in a row, then you get to a point where the brain is sort of forced to adapt to what you're demanding it to do.
Wow.
So you're not letting it get away with going back to the old
Being lazy.
inefficient way of doing it.
So you're overcoming the laziness of the brain basically to do the
Yeah,
same old,
but
same old.
right, you're making it adapt to you instead of you, accommodating, changing your lifestyle to, not get symptoms.
And this
So
is key. Like when mum had her aneurysm and stroke 10 years ago, and I would have the arguments, the doctors would go like, she's got massive neural fatigue. You can't train her for more than a few seconds at a time because she just has not got any focus whatsoever. And my approach, because I'm an ultra marathon runner, is my history, right? A professional ultra endurance athlete. And I just knew that like with an ultra endurance training background, you just had to train your ass off, and you had to find a way around the fatigue, right? You had to find,
yeah,
if you had to walk, you had to crawl, you had to stretch for a bit, you had to change. And so what I did with mum, unknowingly at the time, but I just changed the impetus of what I was putting in. So she would not be able to focus, say we were 6 months in. At the very beginning, she had bugger all of anything. So it was really me moving her limbs, me trying to talk to her, trying to engage her, trying to get her eyes,
I
get
like
her to
that you were
sit.
moving her limbs. That's okay. Keep going. This is
Yeah.
really, really interesting.
Well, my sort of thing was she's atrophying. Things like drop foot I didn't catch, and so she ended up with a drop foot because nobody told me that, lying in bed with your feet like this, which ended up being a major. But I tried to move her every hour of every day in some way, shape, or form. And then as her brain started to have, and I use some hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I don't know what you know about that or think about that, but it was for me a cornerstone of it. But it was the training, the 8 hours a day that I put into training her in different facets, as much as I could change up her training, because the neural fatigue was real. But if I would get her to focus, and we're focusing on doing a little basic task like wiping the pan, with her hands. So she's using her right hand because she was paralyzed on the right side. Very basic, sitting there doing something like that. She doesn't know what she's doing really, but I'm making her do something. And then I would change it, and then I'd be working her feet, and then I'd be doing something else, and then I'd have her in the hyperbaric, and then I'd do. And so the whole day was an 8-hour program, basically, of input. In between rests, lots of rests as well. But that push and pull, push and pull, push and pull, push and pull, month after month after month, and thousands and thousands of hours, I retrained her brain. Yeah, and I didn't have the expertise that obviously you and your team have, so I didn't do it nearly as efficiently. Things like vestibular eyes, your eyes and your
Right.
what she was able to stand and balance, and actually, because she had no vestibular system whatsoever, so she couldn't even sit; she'd fall over. To get it actually to stand without support took me a year. Took me a year and a half to get her to be able to walk without supports. So it was massive, massive undertaking. But we did it. She got a driver's license back, for crying out loud, 2.5 years in.
That is amazing. I think that's really cool that you had that insight from your background as an ultra runner, not giving up on your body, and people give up too easily on brains.
Way too easy.
But notice what you had to do, how much effort it took, how much time, how much consistency, day after day, hour after hour. And that's why it doesn't happen in the medical world, because the
No.
medical community is not set up with that kind of dedication for one patient, that kind of time. And most caretakers don't really they give up as well. A lot of caretakers kind of, they'll do
It's hard. It's
rehab
bloody hard.
for a while, and then they're like, okay, this is just the way they're going to be. Anytime I see somebody in a coma, it's a real tragedy to see they're in this quiet room
Yeah.
with, dead quiet. People come in and they whisper, and my brother was in a coma recently, and I told his daughters, go in there, turn on the TV, make a lot of noise, move his limbs.
Wow.
Simulate walking with him. So, open his eyes, force them to be open. His eyes are, and you'll get kicked out of the intensive care, but do it anyway. Force his eyes open and try and make them move.
Wow. Yeah.
You know,
Give him that
give him,
stimulus.
olfactory stimuli,
Wow.
everything to tell his brain that that it's not dead. Otherwise, if the brain thinks it's dead, it will die. So, but nobody does that. I did this, but I don't want to get into it too much with my wife. She was in a coma, so that's
Wow.
what um,
Yeah.
we did, and I did get kicked out several times, but
Yeah. I've been kicked out of many
the
hospitals
doctor's like,
too.
"What are you doing?" This, we were, doing
Oh.
all kinds of stimulation. Thought this is that, like, this is so dangerous. Like, no, she'll die if we don't do this. And so
Oh.
we had nurses on our side who would help us get away with it, but she would have died if
I know. Yeah. I can
yeah, and your
totally relate.
mother as well. Her brain would just,
That,
if would
I
have
had
no
fight after
reason
fight
to
after fight
function.
in the hospital because I, was wanting to bring in supplements and I wanting to bring in her food because I wanted her to be on a keto diet. I wanted her to have good fats. I didn't want her to have the shitty
Oh
Ensure
yeah,
products
that
that
was a.
they
I know
jam
that
down there.
battle as well with the.
Yeah.
I, you know,
It's just like
and
I sometimes feel like it's an alternate universe in our hospitals, especially over here. It's like 30 years out of date, and you're just battling the whole time against not only the situation that you're in, but the staff and the medical system and without
yeah,
going off on a rant because I could, but I just would do things around it as best I possibly could, and then fought like hell to get her home, because that was the
likewise,
next
yeah.
thing.
I've
Yeah.
got it. I just said we got to get her out of here. Well, she's not ready. Yes, she is. She needs. Well, she's got a feeding tube. Take that thing out. That's pumping her full of all kinds of horrible stuff
Oh
she can
shit.
eat. Sure enough, she could eat,
Wow.
and yeah, it was a fight just to get her out of there.
Yeah.
And to sign away all kinds of things. That's fine, but
Oh yeah.
yeah. So this is
And
yeah,
you
and
know this stuff, like you're a professor who's studied this stuff. You can imagine the average person going up against the system, and what chance have they got? Because they've got the guys in the white coats coming and telling them they know better, you know.
yeah, yeah,
And it's really like you've got a background that they can't really argue with your qualifications so much. But when you're not that
yeah,
person, it's really tough. And
yeah.
yeah, I mean, and the exercise piece of this puzzle is a big one,
Yes.
isn't it? The hit training,
So when you're
relative
talking
to.
about saying, there's a, well, with your mother, in some sense, yes, brains can't be pushed when they hit some limit. So, you work around that limit, you increase that capacity,
Hmm.
like you would any other kind of training. So we have a special kind of cardio that we do, and it has to be tailored to the individual because you have one of the main symptoms of post-concussion is exercise intolerance. So we
Yeah.
have to we have to have tricks to get around the intolerance to get them people to be able to do some pretty extreme cardio. And I have a special kind of high intensity interval that would sound kind of crazy the way it's done, but that doing it that way then gives the brain some neurotrophins and other neurotransmitters that are hanging around for a while that allow the brain to be pushed harder than normal. So you get these windows that give different neurochemicals available for either an hour, several hours, or a whole day, depending on what substance it
Hmm.
is. And so that's one way that we get around the limits that of fatigue that you'd normally have.
Yeah, and I think you always have to tailor it. Obviously, like I'm like that with mum. Like she's sitting on the exercycle in the room next door to me while I'm doing this, so that she's at least moving her legs. She's not moving them fast enough. I could go and yell at her for a second, but she's moving something while I'm working. And this is the thing: as a caregiver, you've got to juggle multiple things, right? So my whole day is set up around her. So I run a number of companies, and so I'm running between mum, company, run company, like just backwards and forwards, 24/7, 24/7. And I have been doing that now for 10 years. It takes massive inhuman efforts but when you love someone and you can see, like, the other thing was that people give up way too early, don't they? Like this takes consistent, persistent training over long periods of time. And I know people come to you for 1 or 2 weeks and get this intensive, but I bet they go home with a big program of
Yeah,
continuing.
they do. And we do get a lot done in that short amount of time. Now we're just talking about something that's very fixable. Uh, Post-concussion is very fixable. It's relatively easy compared to something like what's happened to your mother or what happened to my wife. That's where, okay, so we have these expertise, but I think that it comes down to what you learned from being an ultra athlete is the consistency and the grind,
The
and
grind.
I've
Yep.
got, now that this has been personal for me, not just, with patients, now this is a family member, that it's just a day after day after, of just keeping at it, and not, and the drudgery of it,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Oh yeah.
I guess the best word I can use is grind. It's
It's a
just,
grind.
okay, here we go again. We're starting,
Yeah.
let's start our morning routine.
Yeah.
Okay, let's run through all that. Okay, now it's noon. Let's start with the noon out, and then all the way up to bedtime. Here's our
Yep.
routine for bed, and then the next day is the same thing. And
Yep.
and
And there are no
stuff.
holidays, and there are no breaks, and there are no
Right,
timeouts. And
right. And so I think, there's medical expertise, but I think that your background with that kind of mindset
yeah, it is a
of,
mindset piece. I think that's probably what I
yeah,
could bring to the party when I'm trying to help people, or even from this conversation, is the mindset piece. And I think this
yeah,
goes not just for post concussion or for brain injuries like this, but for every disease. I talked to Dr. Dane Goodenow, who's an expert in plasmalogens last week. Fabulous man.
yeah.
I don't know if you know his work, but awesome.
Oh, I sure do. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I did the prodrome panel on it,
Oh,
and
excellent.
yeah. So yeah, I'm very familiar
Yeah,
with
he's
plasmalogy
brilliant,
work.
and a piece of the mum's rehab too is plasmalogens and all of that. Um, but where was it going? It's the mindset of whatever disease you are facing, and you're told there is no way out. Whether it's like the stuff that Dr. Dane works with, like ALS and Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis or Alzheimer's, there's one way street to dead. And he said, like, life is binary. You're either alive or you're dead. And if you're alive, you've got a chance. And I subscribe to that approach. Like, life is precious. Let's throw everything at it to get as much function back as we can, get as much life quality back as we can, and ignore the statistics sometimes, like, because the
Absolutely.
statistics they are based on the system that is failing, and there's not enough time. But if you're willing to put in the hard work, the time, the money, the effort, the everything else, and then you can have a chance at beating the odds. And that's the message. Are you willing, as a caregiver or as the person, to go through that? That is the question here, not whether it can be done. Like, I just watched a documentary on our TV here, and it was about ALS, and the people were, there is absolutely nothing you can do, and this is what we have to accept. And I'm just like going, oh, that's not true. That's not true. Have you done this, and this, and this? No. You went and took a drug and that didn't work. Like, there's more to this than
Yeah,
it's multifaceted. And that's what I loved about your approach. And it's a hard work approach, like what
yeah,
you've got. Tell us a bit about your team and what parts of so what makes up a
yeah,
good post concussion, because not everybody's going to be able to go to Utah and hang out with you guys. Is there anything that we can take away from, with our limited ability to access everything, but what we
yeah.
could take away
I
from
mean,
your learning?
the active part of it is very active therapy. People, therapists engaging one-on-one. And a lot of the alternative, at least in the US, besides our clinic, are places where they have a lot of devices. So you get maybe light therapy, you get,
Mm-hmm.
you know, something passive though. You go sit in a, hyperbaric chamber, you go sit in a room, somebody sets you up and they leave. That's more cost effective for a clinic to do those kinds of things where they don't have to have so much uh, expensive types of
Time.
personnel to do these one-on-one therapies. So it is that active, and guided by an expert. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that you can't do so much at home, but you can educate yourself and learn a lot. The other trick to it though is that there it's a trick. The way that you proceed with therapies that are different from one another. So vision therapy, vestibular, cervical therapy, working on the cognitive stuff, sensory things. If you go to, especially vision, if you go too far in one direction, you can kind of undo progress in other areas. So
Wow.
we have a kind of a very parallel, iterative, you kind of bring things, you do a little bit of in one domain, you circle, you talk, the therapists all talk together. They say, okay, this is what progress we made here. Let's see how it's affecting, this domain. Then they work on that a little bit and circle back. And so there's some trickiness to it. Now,
Mm.
this is for post-concussion, but th- there's a basic formula to it, which is we call the PAR cycle: prepare, activate, and rest. So the prepare is some physical activity, um, that that should be fairly intense. You should really get your heart rate up, and then that gives you that window when you can push things cognitively a little harder, and then rest, recover, and then go through that cycle again. The So for post concussion recovery specifically, I could give a little away of it. People can try this.
Yes, please.
It's a high intensity interval with an accelerated cool down. So it sounds kind of crazy, but what you do is you warm up, and then you do some activity that's going to really get your heart rate up fast, like an elliptical or doing burpees. Will do
Yeah.
something where you're using a lot of your
A lot of muscles. Yep.
body pumps. Now, if you do something that uses your quads, that's good because a lot of BDNF is generated from your quads. Interestingly,
Wow,
so for
that's a bit
brain,
of a
it's something
nugget.
for your brain, but but okay, so back to this regimen, then you go all out for, to your wall, to you go, a minute or whatever it is on the on the machine, and until you reach that
Out of breath.
anaerobic pressure.
Yep.
You have to stop, and then you immediately stop. You get off the machine, you lie down, you sit down, you relax every muscle in your body. You're fighting for breath. That's fine. You try to get your breathing back. You even meditate, whatever you can do to cool down.
Dropping fast.
Yeah,
Wow.
drop fast. Try to even psychologically pretend like you're not going to do another cycle. That's what I do. I'm like, okay, I'm done. That's it. I'm not getting,
Wow. Okay.
kind of fooling your brain that it's in that stage where now it thinks you're done. It's going to start doing some different things with the blood vessels, with the chemicals, and you surprise, you get back on and you do it again. Because there's something special that happens at the beginning of a workout. When you go from, because you're in more parasympathetic dominant state, then you start pushing. You notice that the most miserable part of a workout or a
Yeah,
run
it's always
usually
the
is the
beginning.
beginning,
First
right?
fifteen.
And that's
Yeah.
because your parasympathetic system is kind of doesn't want to disengage. It's like, okay, you sure you want to do this? We could just, sit on the couch and watch something, and then you keep having, like, then it lets go and lets the sympathetic kick in,
Wow.
and then you start feeling better, and then you can push the sympathetic more. So what this does, by going through those cycles of extreme rest and then back up to the high activity, the extreme rest, you're giving more opportunity. You don't quite get down to that baseline, but you are giving more of that start opportunities for those startup mechanisms. There's a little interesting little fight that goes on in the ANS between the sympathetic and parasympathetic, where they fight it out as you're starting the next cycle.
Wow.
That strengthens that relationship. That gets that. That's so that's another benefit of doing these accelerated cool down hits. It strengthens the autonomic nervous system, but then it also is a quick way to get a lot of these great brain chemicals. Something also very special that happens when you are really at your limit, when you're going all out, and you hit that wall where you can't, your muscles are just cry. No, we've got to have oxygen.
Yeah.
You got to stop,
We're
or
dying.
and your brain would, you would literally die if if right. So, but there are very really great things that happen at that point as well. So, and again, that can be difficult with people who are struggling with exercise intolerance. So we
Yeah.
have little tricks to get around that with breathing and cooling and different things to keep the nausea, usually nausea, headache, pounding that they'll get. And we have some tricks with CO2 therapy as well. But
Wow.
just in general, that's been a
So people
fairly
could try
effective
that.
thing for
Yeah.
people to try.
And maybe under guidance, at least with a PT or something, if you, and this is
Yeah,
hard when you've got people who have had post-concussion for a long time, maybe they're they're not trained, they're maybe overweight, or they're disabled, or they're elderly like
yeah.
mum. You can't push physically too far, so you've got to tailor it to the person, obviously.
You
you know
do it, but then the thing is that the less fit they are, kind of sometimes the more
you get
goodies
the
you get
better.
by
Okay.
doing
Oh,
anything,
wow. Uh-huh.
and so if you to whatever degree you're able to work out as intensely as you can, and safely, you got to worry about your cardiovascular um, uh, factors as well. Then that's an opportunity to do that's called the post-exercise cognitive boost. A lot of people feel sharpest right after a good
Totally.
workout.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. So, that's when I kind of prioritize the stuff that I least want to do, that takes, the most kind of,
Effort,
hard
brain
thinking. And
effort.
I schedule to do right after I worked out. That's when I feel my best and brightest. So, and it's the same thing with your rehab. So if right after that, then do some brain games or whatever challenging things you can find to do.
Yeah, you have a lot of vestibular work, I believe. Like, explain to people, why does like doing sorry, vestibular. I mean, using your eyes, refocusing, training your eyes in certain ways helps the vestibular system. How does that
Yeah,
how does that interact with it all?
yeah, and that's again where it takes a specialist. But one of the basic breakdowns, most common thing that we see is the vestibular ocular reflex. So you have circuitry in your brain that computes how your head is moving, how your body is moving, and it immediately tells your eyes how to adjust. So, your eyes are constantly adjusting for head movement. When that computation breaks down, you get really miserable because your eyes are always lagging. Your eyes aren't keeping up they're not moving with your head and your body. And you get, you get dizzy, you get nausea, you get, headachy, those kinds of things. So there is a an exercise that you do. You have to you have to do in the right direction. So you find that people have a problem in one head direction and not the other.
Uh-huh.
And you want to rehabilitate only the one that's not good, and not rehabilitate the one that's good. Otherwise, everything keeps the
Out of
same, and you
balance.
don't end up getting any benefit. So
Mm,
that's one of the things that takes some guidance.
train.
But it then we also find, well, then you work on people's necks. So most people that have injuries will have neck injuries, and you need to get that, the musculature of the neck in place. And then, there's a balance part to it um, but so we find that when people have vestibular problems, there's a lot of it is the eyes, but there's also something to breathing that's going on that can be part of vestibular problem. And then the otolith bones, that they're sensitive to gravity,
Mhm.
and they can become injured. So there's something about the connection with the brain, the fibers that connect to those bones that respond to gravity can become worn or broken. You can rehabilitate those by, we use a special device that stimulates those
in
at a
the
certain
ears.
frequency on a certain side. Again, you have to kind of go through some testing, and you can get those fibers to become, to re-engage and become, attached and responsive again to the otolith bones. About half of our patients respond to that therapy and need that therapy. If you do it and it doesn't do anything for you, then you know that's not your problem. You've got problems with the canals maybe instead, which this doesn't address. And then you address that through, a lot of this kind of whatever makes you dizzy. You find a motion that makes you dizzy, and then you keep doing it. So
Wow.
you got,
Okay.
you got
Do the
like,
shit that doesn't it's not
yeah,
pleasant.
it's a symptom aggravation. So the brain, under a lot of circumstances, it can adapt from failure. So you move a certain way, you get dizzy. That's a failure. In a lot of cases, the brain can learn from that failure and make adjustments. So you let it fail, and then it now it doesn't always work for everything, but there are people should at least try it. Like, if you find, like, I lean back in my chair and whoa, yeah, do that some more,
Just keep doing
if
it.
you stand up and you get dizzy, um, you have an orthostatic issue, like some POTS kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do it again, safely be in a place where you can fall down if you get lightheaded, but stand up again, and you might find that
So you're
you get some
training that
regulation there. So
autonomic.
that's kind of a symptom aggravation approach.
So you're creating this adaptation in the network at all times. And ideally you have a specialist who knows how to do all this vestibular or balance training or work out which areas is, but for the person who can't get to your incredible clinic, just putting in stimulus every day, consistency,
Yeah,
exercise, challenging the body in many different ways and safely, obviously.
that's right. And you have time, I mean, you don't have an expert, but this is kind of the biohacking world, I guess,
Yeah.
where you have yourself and time to try, so you try things, you eventually stumble across something that works for you.
Yeah.
And not, it's not too dangerous, these things either work or they don't work. There's not much you can do to make things worse. There's nothing that you can do to make a concussion worse, other than another hit to the head, or
Yeah.
some, where your brain gets jostled by, being on an amusement park ride, or in a car where you're not the driver and you can't brace for it. So aside from rapid head movements or another injury, pushing your brain isn't making it worse. So, a lot injuries to our bodies, you can overwork, and the pain. So you have a knee injury and you push too hard and the pain tells you, you're causing more damage.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the same with the brain. Is different. When you push your post-concussed brain and you get symptoms, you're just getting the symptom. It's not causing more damage.
It's not
And
damaging.
it might,
That's
in
important
some
for people to
cases,
know.
might actually be
Yeah.
doing a little bit of adjustment and rehabilitation.
Wow.
So don't be afraid of the symptoms coming from what you're doing, and you're not making it worse.
That's really important, I think, for people to hear so that they're not scared of the thing. I mean, obviously, do everything, if you're standing up and you're dizzy, you need to make sure you're not going to fall over. You need someone there with you or
Yeah,
whatever, your mattress on the floor or whatever the case may be. So be sensible with this, but you're not actually going to damage yourself by stimulating your brain in many different ways and
no,
constantly doing that and changing it up and being persistent with it is the thing. And then I mean, in Mum's case, it was a combination of, hyperbaric, plasmalogens, keto, exogenous ketones, supplements up the wazoo, really good strict
yeah,
diet, exercise constantly, and vestibular system work, eye work as best as I could do, chiropractic work. There's a lot that goes into this, but by having that multifaceted approach, then you can get sometimes extraordinary results. You know, if you're willing to
Yeah,
hang in there for the long term. Unfortunately, most people don't. They give up. We're
yeah,
definitely
I
yeah.
kind of like this direction that we're going where, if you come to our clinic, we can do this. And the advantage is that we can do it very quickly. We can get right to the problem. We can do it in very supervised. We can go through all this, whereas if you don't, then if you can't come to this clinic, then you're going to have to
Go harder
experiment
longer.
with yourself. You're going to have to stumble on what the right formula is. But you can, if you're consistent and
Yeah.
persistent.
And
So
and sitting
I
in a
kind of
dark
like
room, yeah,
yeah,
is not the answer. And I think a lot of people like stop working, stop training, stop doing all of this because they think they need to rest. And rest is the worst thing that you can do. Our bodies are made to move. Our bodies are made to
yeah,
train. We need that blood flow. We need that oxygen. We need the delivery of the nutrients. So yeah, not
especially right
doing
after a
that.
concussion. I get several calls a week because people know what I do and I have to go out and train. So there's always somebody who's, got a concussion, you know, and they call me that, this happened today, what do I do? And they say, they're at the ER, they told them to go home and rest and I don't know, but you need to get moving, get on the exercise bike, do something that keeps your head so it's not, you don't want to keep your eyes fixed. Your eyes are going to be kind of wonky for a while. You're going to get nauseous, but keep your heart rate up. So I always have them immediately get on an exercise bike and try to engage in as much cognitive stuff as they can. Try to go about their normal day. They may get a lot of symptoms. They may get terrible headaches, but that's what you need to do to stave off that initial maladaptive
Right.
organization. And there's even more to it than that. There's some protective mechanisms that rush in and they try to shield those neurons from further damage. They can be a little overprotective. And so if you keep blood flow and you keep those brain cells firing, what they do is they lock down the brain cells trying to protect it, but they also lock down its functionality.
Right. Right.
And so if you can get some sparks out of those, they kind of tell those protective mechanisms, I'm okay, you don't need to be so protective, back off a little bit. So blood flow will do that. And then firing, it both keeps those overprotective mechanisms backing off and it tells the brain network that it's got viable brain cells there. Don't give up on those. You know,
Don't
don't
shut them down.
reorganize. Just
Yep.
hang in there and wait for
Wow.
those.
So that immediately after is really important. What's your take on, like, we've got play rugby as our national game sort of over here, and we have our guys when they get hit in the head on the rugby paddock, they might get taken off for an HIA. What do you think of an HIA?
Yeah,
She says
they're pretty useless.
provocatively. They're pretty useless.
I mean, yes, they, I'm all for being very conservative with, getting out of the game.
Oh yeah,
And
but they go back
I've
too
actually
early.
known a few Americans out there who grew up playing rugby, who played American football.
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with, I grew up with Polynesians in the community of
Oh,
Tongans.
awesome. Oh, cool. Yeah.
I played a very rough version of rugby as well. But, I'm all for being very conservative because you don't want to get hit more. You don't want your head moving a lot. You don't want, you've got to deal with with the visual problems that are most likely going to come. Let that calm down. But it's more just you know, get off the pitch, but then get on an exercise bike and try to keep your heart rate up. Even right after the concussion.
Wow. That alone is great.
Around, keep moving. Um,
And don't,
but
like, a lot of them just get sent back on the paddock. And, even if you've had a
yeah,
small knock to the head, that second hit that comes
yeah,
later in the rugby game.
yeah. There's that. And so it's just a matter of how conservative you want to be. It's hard. It's hard because when I worked a lot with the National Football League and in their careers, they have
Sure.
to. They only have depending on their position, they might only have a couple of opportunities per game to show that they're worth their contract. So they may be a receiver that only gets the ball to them maybe 2 times a game, and they've got to come through. Then they can keep their career going. So there is that's taken into consideration. But if it were only a matter of your health, then yeah, of course
You'd get off.
As conservative.
Yeah. And the consequences, when you've had repetitive brain injuries over and over again, the consequences 20 years later, 30 years later, the Alzheimer's, the MS, the Parkinson's, the mood changes, the personality changes, all of that sort of stuff that happens later. And often, I had a brother who's a professional rugby player, got hit in the head so many times. He's got problems now in his 50s, and a lot of his friends as well, because they got, back then there was no HIAs, they just, harden up and keep going. And it's tough now because there's a lot of damage done.
That's all avoidable too. I mean, the problem is that, you finish your career and then you don't get treatment. Or basically what's going on is they have post-concussion syndrome. They have these inefficiencies, these metabolic inefficiencies. Their brain is, using this inefficient way of doing things, kicking out all kinds of, bad byproducts that eventually culminates in a CTE or, dementia. But it's avoidable if you re-regulate your system, if you do these things that re-engage neuroplasticity, get the brain efficient, get a nice clean, you could have had many concussions. There's still hope, it's still in that state of kind of limbo of being fixable, because you don't have cell death. So you take somebody at the end of a very rough career, they've had many concussions, you scan their brain, you may not see a lot of problems at all. It might look totally normal because those brain cells are still alive. So that shows you can do something about it. Even if you've had many concussions, you can still fix your brain and avoid.
There is hope. And be proactive and go out and take the right supplements, eat the right diet, do the right exercise, do the training, do the hyperbaric eating. All of those aspects that you can be proactive so that you don't end up with Alzheimer's or dementia or something horrible happening to you later on. That is, because you are predisposed more to those things. Dr. Mark,
I mean,
sorry.
this is a message I might be overstating it, but just you don't just have to sit and wait for, oh no, am I going to get
definitely not.
You have agency, you have control over that.
Yeah. And we've done lots of episodes on various aspects. I've interviewed Dr. Mark Gordon and, of course, Dr. Dayan and Dr. Dale Bredesen and all these people that have their proactive plans, if you like, that you can take, and yours as well. And, if we listen to all of that and see what can I do for my loved one, what can I afford, what can I get access to, what can I take away from that conversation, and there's nuggets in every one of those, because then there's things that we can be proactively doing. And prevention and proactiveness is, I think is absolutely key, not waiting for the problem to arise before we do something about it, which seems to be the sort of standard medical model. We wait till you have diabetes before we treat the diabetes, even though we can see it coming 10 years before,
Right. Yeah.
It's crazy, like, why are we not going, okay, you've been a rugby player for 15 years, you've had 100 different concussions, maybe we want to be proactive, maybe we want to go and do some hyperbaric and some HIIT training and some saunas and get some BDNF going, and whatever the case may be. There's a lot of things we can do. Dr. Mark, thank you so much for sharing your brilliance and your wisdom. I know you've been doing this a long time. The functional MRI, I hope that people all around the world start getting access to functional MRI. We don't have it here. There's one place that I know of in New Zealand that's doing it, and it's way over the other side of the country. It's not sort of standard, and I'd love to see that sort of technology and like your wisdom on how, and I know that's why our mutual friend, Dr. Elizabeth Harris, is sort of working on a brain centre down
Yeah.
here. But, you know, we need these advanced sort of technologies as well, so we can actually see what's going on in the brain.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
yeah.
It's not too hard to set up a place to be able to do fMRI. It's just, you know, what do you do with it? You know, so we can generate the report. People can do their own version. Then it's kind of like then how do you use it?
Yeah.
That expertise. But it's all, it's, you know, we did it and other people can too. You just have to break out of the structures of your medical system that you're in, or convince them to change the way that.
Yeah, it's probably easier to set up your own, but it's always like, you know, like these are things that are not then paid for. They're not, you know, they're not funded by insurance and so on and so forth. You know, we have to understand, I think, that the insurance system or the social health system that we've got in New Zealand is very much limited to what it can actually offer you. So, you know, I always try and get people to start putting some of their money away. You know, if they can put 10% of their paycheck away every week or 5% or whatever they can manage for future health related things, you know, to have that nest egg for when you need something that's not offered by the standard medical system. And there will be, if you want the things that are actually going to help you, then that's the way that it has to probably be in the future.
Yeah.
You know, it's a pay to play system, unfortunately. And that's why,
unfortunately, these things are expensive. I wish they weren't. I wish we've made so many efforts to try to make things as cheap as possible, but you just hit some limit where you have to pay all the therapists.
You all got to make a living, right? Everyone's got to eat. It is difficult, but as the more we scale these things, the more people are aware of it, then we slowly may change the actual system, the medical system, you know, and that too has its, you know, validity. So, you know, we just got to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's been wonderful to interview you today. I thank you so much, Dr. Mark. You're just a
very
legend.
Welcome.
And I'm very grateful to Elizabeth for connecting us and learning so much from you. So thank you so much. And where can people find you if they are wanting to come to Utah and they're wanting to work with your team or, you know, reach out to you? How do they do that?
Well, if you Google cognitive FX, you know, you'll get there.
Yep, cognitive effects. I'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's cognitive FX. You Google it, will come up all kinds of contact information, all kinds of information in general, so you can read, watch, you know, videos.
Educate
There's
yourself.
so much information you can educate yourself with, both about coming to the clinic or, you know, just about if you can't, what you can do, you know, things like what we've talked about.
Absolutely brilliant. That's a service to humanity. So thank you very much, Dr. Mark. You're absolutely wonderful.
Well, welcome.
Thanks so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, hit the notification bell and subscribe, and of course share it with just one person who you think could really benefit from this content. Click here to watch last week's episode, and click here for my website, and click here to watch a video you may not have seen.